Welcome to Data Driven Leaders, a podcast for business and technology leaders who are trying to shape and influence the future of data and analytics. In each episode, we feature conversations with data-driven leaders who are at the forefront of using data to solve complex business challenges. Let's jump in now and uncover some of the biggest challenges today's data-driven leaders face and find out what it really takes to build a data-driven culture.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Data Driven Leaders. I'm your host, Christina O'Reilly, and this episode is brought to you by GenSquared, a service provider dedicated to solving complex data and analytics challenges for today's enterprise. So in a world that's still being turned upside down by the pandemic, more and more companies are becoming hyper-focused on identifying ways where they can remain competitive and drive growth, or at least they're trying to. You know, in our previous episode with David Lloyd, the CDO at Ceridian, we talked about how businesses are frozen under the volume of data that's being generated. And along with that volume comes increased complexities around how you manage it, right? You've got all these varied data ecosystems to contend with. You've got cloud, you've got on-prem, you've got a hybrid approach, not to mention all the various ways to access it. So the reality is, most data available to businesses goes untapped. You know, according to a report by Seagate, about 32% of data available to enterprises is actually put to work. The remaining 68 goes unleveraged, along with all the untapped possibilities with it. So clearly it's time to rethink data. At some point, and hopefully soon, we're going to emerge from this pandemic. And when we do, companies need to recalibrate, rethink how we use data. In order to get this right, I think companies need to start prioritizing data as a strategic business asset and really start reimagining the business models and how to make use of that data. My guest today couldn't agree more. She believes a good data strategy, among other things, should be based on strategic business goals, one that's constantly innovating and pushing the boundaries of your data capability. Welcome, Rupinder Dhillon, Head of Enterprise Data at Sobeys. Welcome, Rupinder. I'm so excited to have you on today.
I'm incredibly excited and happy to be here. I've been listening in on some of the previous conversations that you've had on the podcast and was eager to be part of the conversation because they've been so great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So, you know, in times of crisis, do you think it's easy for organizations to default to old habits, or do you find that it actually motivates them to push the boundaries and look at things a little bit differently and be innovative? You know, what are you seeing right now?
It's a great question. And I think it really depends on the organization and the type of organization and culture that exists in the organization and also the industry. Having been at HBC, and I was the chief data officer at that time for Saks office in Hudson's Bay, you know, we had the opposite problem or opportunity because we were being so heavily disrupted by the pandemic. So stores were closed. There was a massive shift to, you know, the trajectory to move to online was accelerated. And so there was a real hunger and appetite to understand more about, you know, what was driving those online behaviors, you know, what could we expect and things like that. So it was an opportunity to really highlight some of the capabilities within the data space and how the data space could support those conversations. And, you know, in organizations that I think did it really, really well is that they saw this as an opportunity to find good talent because unfortunately, you know, we saw that through the pandemic, projects got put on hold, budgets were put on hold, and there was a lot of turnover within companies. And so I think, you know, if I look at some of the companies that you know made some really smart moves, it was ones that, you know, saw this as an opportunity to, you know, pick up good talent, but also double down in their data space.
Right. Well, I think, you know, to say that COVID has really tested us, it's probably putting it lightly. And so, you know, just look at, you know, the impacts of remote working. I'm sure we never imagined the pressures required to support an infrastructure to sustain so many people remotely, right? And being able to do that and probably moving forward. So what do you think are going to be some of the trends that's going to stay as a result of us being pushed, you know, so to speak, because of COVID?
So I don't know if I totally buy into the idea that remote work is the only way to go going forward. And that this will be a basic expectation I think the pendulum will constantly swing back and forth. I think what we've shown is, if, I like to use this example. If I rewind a couple of years, and I was running the AI Labs team at Bell Canada. And at that point, it was very much that teams had to be side by side, right? They couldn't even have the cubicles. They couldn't have walls between them. They all had to work in the same office. They needed the kind of communal style picnic table so that they could collaborate together. And that was, really pushed as the only way that our data science teams could work together effectively and efficiently. And I think what this is, and now it's the opposite. It's some of the data science and data teams that are saying, well, you know what, I'm much more productive at home.
Yeah.
So I think it's shown that, our teams are resilient and can adjust to ways of working. And it really depends on what's the project that you're working on, who are the teams, and, what do they need? Because I'm hoping that the style of, being able to collaborate together, whiteboard together, all of that doesn't go away. And that we balance the need for, time that people need to kind of concentrate on their own work, and that time to really kind of, put the blinders on and work and focus with the collaboration that's needed. So I'm hoping that going forward, it's really a hybrid model that values both personal time and personal space, as well as the need to collaborate with teams and get face-to-face with teams as well.
It's interesting about the whole concept of collaboration and the importance of working together, in terms of how much does that play into being able to rethink how you approach data and to be agile. And so how much of that really drives that ability to rethink how you approach things and the necessities that goes along with it to become agile as it relates to data, obviously.
Yeah, I think there's a reason why, things like design thinking in data, those types of concepts are really, and ways of working are really taking off. And I think it's because it allows for people to put themselves in other people's shoes and really put the focus of what you're building on what is the outcome you're trying to drive and what's the experience of the person that's going to have to use it, right? And really trying to, bring those two worlds together. And so I think that will remain important, and especially in the data space when, we've come from being kind of report builders and you build a database to now having to think through the user experience of people having to interact with that data, and how do you present it in a way and make it interactive enough in a way that people want to use it, and it's just natural to everything that they do. So I think that piece will continue to be important and will grow in importance.
You talked about just now about report builders. Do you think there's a perception out there as it relates to data and the teams that work in data that they're just report builders, so to speak? Or is that moving away? Are we moving away from that perception?
Where there's that perception, I think and this is going to sound a little bit critical, but it may be a little bit self-imposed. So there are still teams that consider, the role of data is to create reports for other parts of the organization. And there are data teams that still operate that way, right? But as you're shifting more towards sort of this data as a product approach, you're seeing that kind of dissipate a little bit. But it really depends on what's your data strategy and how are leaders actually not just thinking about it, but actually implementing it.
Right.
So yeah, if organizations are still viewing this as, hey, I have a question, I need to build a report for that, then yeah, you're going to keep yourself pigeonholed in as report builders.
So let's talk about, a good data strategy, right? And as we come out of this pandemic and moving forward, the essence of the importance of developing a good data strategy. So you're currently working at Sobeys in terms of and doing and pushing forward some really great innovative things there. And you've also led the team at HBC, where you executed one of the largest data platform modernization projects in Canada, moving from on-prem to cloud. So walk us through what were some of the steps or some of the strategies that you employed in order for you to get to that point.
I think I took a step back and like a lot of data leaders, I think of it as, what do we need from a defense perspective and what do we need from an offense perspective? And what are then the enablers for both? I think it is, especially as in a data org that's kind of starting out in modernization, I think it's easy to kind of get sort of trapped in the defense part. And when I'm talking about defense, I mean, kind of your bread and butter data quality, ensuring you have data catalogs, making sure all of those foundational pieces are in place. But in this day and age, I think you can't afford to not also push ahead in the offense space. And when I'm talking about offense, I mean, a more kind of forward-looking data collection strategy, right? So do I have information about how things are in my warehouses and refrigeration? Do I need to start thinking about, IoT solutions that will allow me to capture more data? Am I starting to think about what data will be required down the road as personalization gets much more targeted? So I think it's important that you bring the organization along in terms of understanding there's a defensive, basic, foundational piece that needs to be done, but you can't lose sight of, things are moving and moving quickly. And you have to be careful about thinking that those things have to be sequential. And so how do you move forward in some of the offense and some of the kind of innovative and forward-looking things while you're building out that foundation?
And I like that point, the fact that it doesn't have to be sequential, right? Because it's not going to be sequential all the time. And so in order for you to be able to be offensive, I'm assuming that must require you working across the organization and getting that shared common understanding of what we need to work towards. And walk me through some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think when you start with sort of, data culture and, how do you become a data-driven organization? I think it has to come back to people and why should people care, right? I can lead a conversation about data governance and start with, data stewardship and what's the difference between a data steward and a data owner. But let's face it, people don't care. So you've got to put it into the context of what it is that they actually have to live day to day. So the approach that we're taking at Sobeys, actually with the help of Gen Squared, is let's actually target very specific business processes and problems that are, a result of data or have an impact on data, so that we're actually talking the language of the business and we're going to be addressing things that impact them day to day. And then as we're doing that, then we can layer in, concepts around data quality and concepts around ownership. You own the data because you own the process, because we're putting it in language that they understand and is relevant to them. And I think once you start getting that sort of interest, to be able to pepper in things like, you can't access this data today, but if you were able to access it, these are the types of questions you'd be able to answer, to start, feeding their interest and their excitement and kind of bring them along on the journey. If we start the conversation with, here's all of the things that we're going to do around AI and automation, you're going to lose people very quickly. So you really have to make sure that everything that you're talking about leads with what's most relevant to them.
It sounds like you're talking about employing more softer skills like empathy and understanding and collaboration. Are those some of the skills that are starting to come through on the data side more and more? Like I'm starting to see that more and more.
I completely buy into that 100%. It's funny. I've talked to other data leaders, and we often talk about how our role sometimes feels like the company counselor, right? Because you get to hear and see very different perspectives, because data touches every single part of the organization, and every part of the organization has different challenges and opportunities. And because it is so people driven and it ties all of your processes together, you really have to take a nuanced approach to each and every part of the organization and how you're dealing with them. But you really get to see, what motivates people. I often joke that you've got to, you do have to understand what the motivation is, so that you know how to approach it and how to approach a particular person, leader, different part of the organization. So yeah, absolutely.
It definitely is a culture change. And for some organizations, a culture shock, right? Just because of the way they view data. It needs to sit in this box and I need to have my data sitting in with me, so to speak. So it definitely is a change in thinking. One of the things that we're doing at Gen Squared and that we're talking about a lot with our customers is around the approach to achieving that data culture. And one of the tools that we use, or processes, I should say, is product management approach. And in terms of, and that starting to come up more and more in our conversations around the value of really looking at data as a product. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely buy into the data as a product. We're actually taking that and extending it even a little bit further at Sobeys. So I think a few years ago, as this shift to data as a product, that mindset started to take hold. You started seeing that shift from, the BI and data teams being reporting teams and report builders, to more about, hey, we're building platforms that people can interact with and get information and get knowledge. And so that it was super important, I think, in the BI and in the analytics space. What we're actually trying to do now at Sobeys is extend that same mindset to data domain ownership. So a very traditional approach to data governance has been, you find one owner, a business owner of a data domain, and they're also responsible for that domain. So typically your chief marketing officer, it's the owner of customer data and is responsible for customer data, or your merchandising team is responsible for all your item data. There's a couple of things that I think I've always struggled with in that model. One is that in this day and age, everybody should care about customer data. Everybody should care about item data. There is no longer this sense, or shouldn't be, you should be striving towards no longer having the sense that this particular data is only important to one part of the organization. It's how do you unlock that data for the entire organization? And so what we've done at Sobeys now is introduce, these domain leaders as product managers. So we have a product manager of our customer data. We have a product manager of our item data. And to treat the build out of that domain and the management of that domain as a product. So good quality, making sure that that product is correct, but really also then driving a forward-looking roadmap of, how do we want to evolve our customer data? How do we want to improve the usage of it and get more users? So it's something that we're trying out that has gotten people really excited because they can understand it, right? And again, we're putting it into language that people can understand and appreciate. So stay tuned and we'll see how that goes.
Exciting times. It really is about that level. And it's really important that you need to have that level of creativity to be able to envision that, right? So it's more and more I keep coming back to the skills, as you said. It's amazing how data it's transformed the perspective of people, right? In terms of how they view data and how to use it. And you do really need to be creative and not only how you access it, but how you communicate the value across the organization so you can get everyone on board with you, so to speak.
Yeah. I always say that people always ask, what are the skills that are important in data? And I always, you can talk about the technical skills and you can talk about the business skills, but the two facets that I think are the most important are curiosity and creativity, right? And I think it's through those two things that really the opportunities are uncovered. And I think it's up to us as data leaders and technology leaders to provide a platform and to provide data in a way, and a consumption layer and a way to access the data that really pushes and prioritizes those two things.
Yeah, data curiosity has come up quite often in my conversations thus far. So I completely agree with you. So knowing that you need to have curiosity and creativity, what would be some other advice would you have for someone who's struggling with, wrangling their data, so to speak, and trying to build a forward path data strategy?
I think to start with, clearly defining what it is that you're trying to accomplish.
Right.
And then you can figure out what that looks like. So one, what you're trying to accomplish, what culture already exists in the organization. And maybe I can unpack that one a little bit. There's been a few times where I've seen, for example, AI projects, an AI initiative that has, here's the algorithm, here's how we're going to use it. And there's, to really make it work, you've got to have this culture of, test and learn, innovation, be okay to, try and fail, an iterative approach to, adding features and functionality. And if that doesn't exist in the organization, that's a lot of pressure to put on an individual AI project. You're asking an individual AI project to change the culture of an entire organization. So I think it's important to take stock of what's the culture that exists and what changes are needed from an overall cultural perspective to make a data strategy thrive. So I think it's important to spend some time on that. And then deciding if you want, a strategy that's more focused around democratization and making sure that data gets into the hands of more people. If you have a strategy that's focused on, external monetization. So understanding what your end goals are so that that when you're crafting a data strategy, it's getting to the point.
Right.
Because there's so many different things that you can tackle from a data perspective. So it's really important to understand what's the most important. And your strategy is constantly going to evolve and grow and expand. and get into other spaces. So I think that's all of a long-winded way to say, one, what's the culture that you're dealing with in the organization, and is it primed to support something like a data transformation? And then, what are the business outcomes that you're ultimately trying to get to, so that this data strategy matches what you're trying to do?
Understanding your why, right? Looking back and asking yourself, why are we doing this, so to speak? Well, look, I could go on for much, much longer, but we're coming up to our time. But before I let you go, I'm going to ask you a series of rapid fire questions. It's like the TV program, the 73 questions by Vogue, but don't worry, there's only going to be 4. All right, so here we go. What's the best professional advice you've ever received?
I got this very early on. I think I was in my early 20s, but it stuck with me. It's under promise and over deliver.
Very good. What motivates you every day?
The chance to be learning something new and the chance to show somebody something new.
What has been your most exciting initiative or project to date?
I think the first AI project that we did at Bell, and we had big ambitions around it. It was going to be an algorithm that ran in real time. And it was exciting because we started from zero, and the way that we built up and got to where we needed to go, and just the amount of learning that came through all the way through, and just how we were able to bring the executive and leadership team along for the ride with us was really great.
What advice would you give to a younger woman technologist just entering the workforce today?
Understand and take some time to know your own style, and what it is that motivates you, what it is that makes you tick. And always lean in with that first, because as you're going through this field, you're going to be surrounded with lots of different people. And so the more that you can understand your own style and lean in with your own style, the more comfortable and confident you're going to be.
Great advice. Thank you for joining us today. I look forward to the next time.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Christina.
Thank you for checking out this episode of Data Driven Leaders. This show is brought to you by Gen Squared, an organization dedicated to solving data and analytics challenges for the modern enterprise. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow Data Driven Leaders wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit gensquared.com to get immediate access to all of the latest episodes.